Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Bob the Bookerer, and today I wanted to talk about a book that I've read recently that's had a lot of hype and a lot of love thrown at it, and I agree with all that hype and love. That book is Luster by Raven Leilani. Before we begin, just a very quick apologies that my hair is still rubbish. Thanks to I think there's like a pandemic or something going on, something like that. But it's been a while since I've been able to get a haircut, and now I have loads of sunlight. This is a moment. But I've not been able to get to the barbers for a long time, and even despite a bath I had earlier, it has not gone anywhere and is still just as messy and as rubbish as it was before. And also, if my voice is a little bit hoarse or a little bit rough today, that is because I have spent most of this morning and afternoon just like wandering around the house, singing Rufus Wainwright and just like sat there in the bath just like belting it out like I thought I was him. I think that's actually shredded my voice slightly, which maybe, I don't know, maybe that works. Maybe it's now going to have a really husky warmth to it, but I doubt it. It's just going to sound a bit rough, just like my hair. So anyway, back to Luster by Raven Leilani. So this is the story of a young woman who works in publishing. And she is one of the only few black women working in her publishing, in the publishing house that she's at. And she sees quite a lot of problems in terms of what that looks like itself, but also some of her relationships are particularly strained and particularly made more complicated by the world around her and by some of her actions. Apologies, just had to kind of re-edit that bit and just put something in the way so that I wasn't kind of blocked by the sun again. Advantages, natural light. Disadvantages, natural light. Anyway, so this character, Edie, is struggling at her job. She kind of can't seem to find much passion or much joy for a lot of the work she's doing, and she seems to be kind of getting caught in ruts, really. She keeps on having relationships with some of the people who are around her, so I'm just going to shift that so it's just off the camera. There we go. She keeps on having relationships with people in the office, and these keep on going wrong. I say relationships, a lot of them are just sort of hookups and one-night stands as well, and so she doesn't really have the best time, and we keep on sort of seeing how her life is really caught in quite difficult ways, how there are a few awkward moments now because there are people who she's had sex with either in the office or just kind of who are related to the office in some way, and it all gets quite thorny. Anyway, we meet her at the beginning of this novel in a situation where she has just sort of started going on a couple of dates with this man called Eric. And we kind of keep on learning little bits about Eric as it goes. So he's slightly older than her. She's in her 20s. He's, I believe in his 40s. We later find out that he's married and that he has a child. And what's more, the child is black. It's an adopted child to these white parents. And so it kind of, at first in Edie's eyes, she's sort of worrying that she's being kind of either kind of fetishized, or that there is some kind of thing where he is only interested in her to kind of help kind of erase some kind of white guilt or some kind of thing like that. And so, which I think is a really interesting thing, because it kind of shows that right from the beginning this character is kind of torn. She has no real clear sense of character's motivations around her, and that has left her in quite a few awkward situations as well. This character Edie kind of starts this relationship with this man, and she kind of describes having gone on so many dates with this man, and nothing really quite coming from it. And at first she's kind of a bit worried, like they don't seem to be having sex. Is this normal? It's been sort of 7-8 dates. What's going on? And it kind of eventually becomes this thing where she moves in through a long kind of chain of events, moves in with the married couple, and so there she is, in a house with these two wealthy people in their kind of 40s who are married but kind of have sort of some sort of open marriage. She's kind of got this weird tension with the wife because she's not quite sure if the wife is the one paying her to kind of clean the house and kind of keep her around, whether the wife hates her, all of those kinds of things. And she's there with this young woman as well, who is, you know, this black child. And so Edie is kind of thinking, have I been kind of brought on to look after this black child? You know, is this kind of a weird attempt at giving this child a black mother? Like, she's really kind of torn about what's actually going on here. And what I think is really interesting about how this is done is it's set up so subtly that we kind of keep on getting these small introductions to things, and we kind of get a few flashbacks to Edie's history and to her own family sort of structure and everything like that. And we kind of get this sort of idea that she's kind of trapped. Edie doesn't really have you know, the resources that other characters in the book have, and really interestingly, we're set up with a foil in some form in the work place, because Edie has someone working just under her who is another black woman, and one of the only very few black women in that publishing house. And as a result, she is kind of very aware that these two, you know, these two women are encouraged almost to be kind of both best friends and rivals at the same time. And it really sets up an interesting discussion, because Edie is so kind of done with her job. Her life is falling apart. She doesn't really want to focus too much on the job around her. But this woman who she's working with, who's sort of just under her, is so hungry for promotion, for getting kind of higher up the ranks. And so it sets up this kind of this kind of foil of, you know, they even have a really frank discussion about it, where the younger black woman says, you know, we have to be twice as good, we have to you know, really prove ourselves, and we have to do whatever it takes to kind of appease you know, kind of white people we work with, make them think that we're really good. And she basically accuses Edie of letting the side down in some ways by being lazy, by not doing her job professionally, and kind of as a result, yeah, really kind of this idea that, like, you are letting down black women, whereas Edie kind of fires back, well, actually, I'm not changing anything about who I am. You know, you are. I'm kind of just living my normal life. This job isn't necessarily for me, whatever. So there's these really interesting setups, and including a few setups that are just really cleverly planted that you don't necessarily notice until a little bit later. So one of my favourites, one thing I thought was brilliant, and this is a bit of a spoiler. I mean, this whole video really is, but a bit of a spoiler of something that I think Raven Leilani sets up really well, which is essentially around black people and the police, and a kind of a showdown, or a moment where essentially Edie and the daughter of the married couple are kind of caught outside the house, or seen outside the house by police, and the police try to stop them, thinking, you know, this is a nice neighborhood, what are these kids doing around here? You know, very kind of racially charged and racist police stop. And obviously one of the, you know, the young girl lives there, and Edie is temporarily living there, or they probably wouldn't have anything to prove it. But in that moment, something really interesting happens, because this young girl has been brought up with white parents, and so hasn't really had the talk, as it were, on what to do as a black person in America when facing the police. And so it's just so interesting, because as a result, this young black woman talks back to the police and does things that if she were white she would probably get away with in the US, when facing the police, in terms of saying, I live here, look, let me show you ID, whatever. And Edie is kind of almost like, oh my gosh, no, you can't do this, like this is just not how you do it. And we suddenly get this really interesting notion of this character being kind of set up of what does it mean to be black in the US, and particularly what does it look like when you're not taught as a young black child how to function, how to live in an incredibly racist you know, sort of community or area or country. And it's really interesting because we also then, we see these beautiful tender moments where Edie is helping the young girl with her hair, helping her kind of find all the kind of local spots where she can get braids, and loads of other things really associated with black hair, with black culture in the US. And so she's kind of the instruction of that for this young child. She becomes a sort of mother figure in a way that, Eric and Rebecca can't give her. And it's just this really interesting moment. I think as well, what makes this book work especially well for me, and I was sold on this book pretty much about a page or two in. I think I've maybe mentioned in other videos before, I can overlook issues I have in stories if the writing is tight and taut. And for this book, I loved the story and I absolutely adored the writing style. It's so brutal and at times quite cold, and I think Raven Leilani is just brilliant with turns of phrase. She's just very good at summing up a whole situation in something very pithy and snide and snarky and witty. I absolutely love her style, and I mean, I believe this is a debut book. It's incredible as a debut because really, like, this is such a fully formed style and voice. And I was just completely hooked on this from the beginning. I just think it's so cleverly done. There were some really funny moments that I wanted to highlight as well. One in particular, I really love when they're talking about, she's talking about diversity in publishing, and about some of the books that are coming up. And I thought this was so interesting. So I'll just read a quick little bit. In the lobby, there is a diversity giveaway. I go up to the table and scan the books, and there are a few new ones. A slave narrative about a mixed-race house girl fighting for a piece of her father's estate. A slave narrative about a runaway's friendship with a white school teacher who selflessly teaches her how to read. A slave narrative about a tragic mulatto who raises the dead with her magic chitlin pies. A domestic drama about a black maid who, like Schrodinger's cat, is both alive and dead, an unseen, nurturing presence who exists only within the bounds of her employer's four walls. An urban romance where everybody dies by gang violence. And a book about a Cantonese restaurant which may or may not have been written by a white woman from Utah, whose descriptions of her characters rely primarily on rice-based foods. I take the book by the white woman and head outside, where Aria is leaning against the building, smoking a cigarette. She casts a bored glance in my direction, reaches into her bag and pulls out another cigarette. I take it, accept her light. I adore this. I really found this so funny, but also really incisive at the same time, because she brings up a really valid and vital conversation that many people have been having around the kinds of opportunities non-white authors are given to talk about their stories and to share their stories, and how so often, people kind of will say, oh, we publish so many books by black authors, or there are so many black films, that have been released recently. Racism doesn't exist. And then you look at what books are kind of allowed, or which ones are kind of promoted the most in terms of advertising, or in terms of, big prizes or whatever. And it's often books like the one she describes there, where, it has a lot of black characters in it, but it seems like, black writers are only almost allowed the space to to talk about some of these things if they conform to these sort of safe topics of things like slave narratives, or the kind of Chinese restaurant example in this. Now, obviously, those are still valid stories and important things to hear about, but I think this is such a great passage for kind of highlighting how writers can get quite pigeonholed in a way that writers of colour can get quite pigeonholed in a way that white writers often aren't. White writers are kind of allowed almost to write about pretty much anything, whereas black writers, people have sort of said in the past many times that writers have kind of been told by agents or publishers or whatever, this would be great, but can we make this character a bit more ghetto or a bit more Asian or whatever, meaning essentially that they want them to be a little bit more stereotypical and whatever, and fit a very specific narrative. And so I think this is really clever, and it's something that I you know, although it's a very different kind of thing, it's something I really appreciate as a gay man, because I've definitely seen how, you know, early early narratives for kind of TV and film where you had gay characters in things were almost only allowed if they had a really tragic story, an AIDS storyline or something else. And although again those stories are really important, it's really damning and really stifling when those are the only stories being told, and about a certain group. And especially being told of that group, not that group writing themselves a lot of the time as well. So I thought that was a really incisive and clever part, and I love how she manages to take such an important point and also find the humour in it. That it's just so absurd that this is the diversity table of this publisher. You know, come along, pick up a really great book about a diverse topic, and here they all are, pretty much all focused on slave narratives and Chinese restaurants. So I think it's a really well done point. And so overall, I was just completely blown away by this book. I think it's so funny, it's so warm, it's really clever. I just love the writing style. It's so compelling, and there is such a kind of a rhythm and a thrust to the book that kind of just really propels it through for me, that I just think is sublime. I was really impressed by this book. I know, you know, some people have kind of had some sort of minor issues with it, totally fair. You know, obviously it's not going to appeal to everybody, but it's a really exciting book, and I completely see what all the fuss was about. I have noticed, obviously, recently it was just longlisted for the Women's Prize, which, I mean, I would be very surprised if it didn't make it to the shortlist. I've not read most of the long list, but I would be really surprised if this book wasn't at least in strong contention for that shortlist. I just think it's so good. Again, when we come around to the Booker long list in probably a few months now, I would be really surprised if this doesn't make it. I think this is a very timely and powerful book, but also just one that I think is just really fun and really clever. Like, it's a really great twist on that kind of I mean, it's been an unfair term in some ways, but kind of a millennial book of kind of, you know, a character in their 20s who is sort of scrabbling by in life. Things are kind of going wrong all over the place, and they're not really able to kind of crawl out of it, and they kind of live a bit of a life that's just a bit kind of where they kind of basically have to constantly lower their expectations. Things are just going wrong. You know, these things are happening all over the place, and they seem kind of fairly powerless to control it, which feels very 2021. So very timely. But I really do, yeah, I really do recommend this book. I think it's absolutely beautiful. Also, side point, now that I've got it held up, this front cover, gorgeous. The US cover, I'm really confused by. Like, I mean, I will admit, I've probably been shaped, my thoughts on the book have probably in some ways been shaped by the cover, in the sense that always kind of happens, right? If you've got a cover that sort of seems to show a certain thing, your mind may kind of look for certain things a little bit more. Obviously, I think I still would have loved this book regardless. But yeah, this is also something that really confuses me. This cover, I just think, is stunning. It's really, it kind of conveys enough of that kind of like the real kind of sexiness and beauty of this book. But it's also just so striking and bold, which feels like what this book is. But yeah, the US cover I find a bit strange. I'll pop it up here. But I find it weirdly, I mean, pun both intended and not, I find it a bit lackluster. Sorry, that was terrible. But yeah, I don't really get it. For me, it doesn't really gel with any of the themes of the book, or like the feel of the book, but I don't know. Maybe it works for some people, I don't know. Anyway, enough rambling about this. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and I really highly recommend you reading it. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if this does pretty well with most prizes this year. Again, that's not the like sum total of an achievement, but it helps. And I really do want to see this on the Booker long list. I really want to see this make the women's shortlist. I think it's worth it, and I really think it's going to be one of those books we think very highly of. And I, again, wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, this is still probably floating around my top 10 from this year, because I just think it's really powerful and really good. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts. Please do pop them in the comments, and let me know about maybe any other books that you've read that maybe Luster reminds you of, or that you think might be quite similar, or that I might also like if I liked Luster. And yeah, have a great time. Enjoy your reading and take care. Bye-bye.